This story will tell about a girl who made one small decision, and that decision changed everything, and what it turned into will surprise you. Hannah never thought of herself as someone who could end up in serious trouble. She was careful, quiet, and mostly invisible in the way teenagers often are when they believe staying out of the spotlight keeps them safe. She followed rules when they mattered, avoided obvious risks, and believed that real crimes happened to other people, louder people, reckless people, people who looked guilty even before being accused. Hannah believed she was different, and that belief was the first mistake. Her life moved in predictable patterns. School during the day, part-time work in the evenings, long walks home with headphones on, scrolling endlessly through her phone before sleep. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous. The kind of life where every day feels forgettable and safe. She had friends, but not the kind who dragged her into chaos. She had plans, though none of them felt urgent. Most of all, she had trust in technology, in systems, in the idea that if you didn't do anything wrong, nothing wrong could happen to you. The night everything began felt exactly like all the others, no tension in the air, no warning signs, just a message asking for a small favor. Someone she knew, not close but familiar enough, asked if she could order a ride through a rideshare app. Their phone was dead, they said. Just a quick trip across town, nothing illegal, nothing suspicious. Hannah hesitated for a moment, but the hesitation felt unnecessary. People shared accounts all the time. It was common, normal, harmless. She ordered the ride. The car arrived, picked up the passenger, and disappeared into the city streets. Hannah watched the app update, saw the route, saw the trip end. The payment went through. The night continued. She forgot about it almost immediately, filing it away as one of those tiny moments that never mattered. A favor done, a problem solved, life moving on. What Hannah didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the car she ordered had already been flagged. Hours before her request, that same vehicle had been involved in something serious, something violent, something that had already triggered an investigation. Cameras had captured license plates, timestamps had been logged, routes had been analyzed. And when the trail began to cool, investigators did what they always do. They followed the data. Data doesn't care about intentions. It doesn't understand context. It doesn't know what just helping means. Data only shows actions, accounts used, phones connected, locations confirmed. And there, quietly sitting in a digital record, was Hannah's name. Days passed before she noticed anything was wrong. Then came the first strange sign, a notification from the app asking her to confirm unusual activity. She dismissed it. Apps sent those all the time. Then, an email. Then a locked account. Each warning felt annoying but harmless. She assumed it was a glitch, a technical issue, something customer support would fix. Then came the knock. Police officers standing at the door don't look like they do in movies. There's no dramatic lighting, no shouting, no immediate chaos. Just calm voices, neutral faces, and questions that feel confusing rather than frightening. At first, they asked about her phone, about the app, about the ride ordered on a specific night at a specific time. Hannah answered honestly, still believing honesty would protect her. But honesty didn't erase the problem, it deepened it. Because from the perspective of the investigation, Hannah wasn't a bystander. She wasn't a helper. She was the account holder, the verified identity, the digital signature that connected a criminal act to a real person. And once that connection exists, it doesn't disappear easily. By the time Hannah realized something was truly wrong, the situation had already moved beyond explanations. Devices were taken, statements were recorded. Her routine life collapsed into interviews, paperwork, and sleepless nights filled with a single question she couldn't escape. How could something so small turn into something this big? She still believed there had been a mistake. She still believed it would be cleared up quickly. After all, she hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't even been in the car. But the system wasn't asking who sat in the back seat. It was asking whose name opened the door. And Hannah was about to learn what it feels like when one harmless decision becomes the first step into a place you never imagined you'd see from the inside. The days after the knock blurred together in Hannah's memory, stitched into one long stretch of anxiety and disbelief. She still went to school. She still showed up to work. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything felt unstable, like the ground, like beneath her feet could give way at any moment. Her phone was gone, sealed in a plastic evidence bag somewhere she couldn't see. Without it, time moved differently. Slower, heavier. Every hour felt like it carried consequences she couldn't predict. At first, she believed logic would save her. The truth was simple. She ordered a ride, someone else used it, and she had nothing to do with what happened before or after. That clarity gave her a strange sense of calm. She replayed the facts in her head, arranging them neatly, convinced that once investigators did the same, the problem would disappear. She didn't understand yet that investigations don't move on clarity alone. They move on patterns, probabilities, and pressure. The questions kept coming, not all at once, but steadily, like water dripping into a glass. Where was she that night? Who asked for the ride? How well did she know them? Had she ever shared her account before? Did she understand the rules of the service she was using? Each question felt harmless on its own. Together they formed a shape she didn't like, a shape that pointed toward responsibility, not innocence. Hannah began to notice how language shifted around her. Officers didn't say mistake. They said violation. They didn't say favor. They said unauthorized use. Words she had never thought about before suddenly mattered more than intentions ever could. Every explanation she offered seemed to generate two new questions. Every attempt to simplify the story made it feel more complicated. At night, sleep became shallow and fragmented. She dreamed about routes on a map, about cars that never stopped moving, about notifications she couldn't open. She woke up with her heart racing, reaching instinctively for the phone that wasn't there. Silence filled the room where constant digital noise used to live. In that silence, fear grew louder. Her parents tried to reassure her, but even their voices carried uncertainty. They believed her, but belief didn't equal protection. They spoke about lawyers, about procedures, about waiting. Waiting became the worst part. Waiting meant imagining outcomes. Waiting meant wondering what information was being found while she stood still. Waiting meant understanding for the first time how powerless someone could feel without having done anything intentionally wrong. The person who had asked for the ride stopped responding. Messages went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. Hannah told herself there had to be a reason, but the silence felt deliberate. She began to realize how fragile her connection to that night truly was. One request, one tap on a screen, one digital trail that led nowhere else but back to her. When the charges were finally explained to her, they didn't sound real. They sounded like something from another life. Terms like facilitation, negligence, and aiding through digital means floated in the air, heavy and abstract. Hannah struggled to connect them to herself. She wasn't a criminal, she wasn't reckless. She was careful, responsible, normal. And yet here she was, sitting across from people who saw her as a link in a chain that had already caused damage. The world outside kept moving. Buses arrived on time, friends laughed in hallways. Social media continued without her. Inside, Hannah felt suspended, as if she were waiting for a verdict that would decide whether her old life still existed. She began to understand that the system didn't measure hearts, it measured actions, and the action it saw was clear: her account, her phone, her authorization. The realization didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly, settling into her chest with a quiet, terrifying weight. This wasn't going away quickly. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something that could follow her, define her, and reshape everything she thought she knew about safety and fairness. And somewhere between another sleepless night and another unanswered message, Hannah felt something break inside her. Not panic, not tears. Something colder. The understanding that innocence doesn't always protect you, especially when technology remembers everything and mercy isn't part of the algorithm. She still didn't know how far this would go. She still believed deep down that it couldn't end badly. But the path was already narrowing, and soon there would be no way to step off it. The first time Hannah heard the word court, it didn't sound real. It sounded distant, formal, like something that belonged to other people's lives. Criminals, adults, people who had made obvious, deliberate mistakes. Not her. Yet the summons arrived anyway, printed on stiff paper, written in language that felt colder than anything she had experienced before. There was no accusation in the tone, no anger. Just certainty. Dates, times, expectations, walking into the courthouse to the courthouse. First time Hannah felt smaller than she ever had. The building was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. Every sound echoed. Footsteps, doors closing, voices carried too far. She noticed details she had never cared about before. Metal detectors, cameras in corners, signs warning about consequences. Everything about the place suggested permanence. What happened here stayed here. She sat beside her lawyer, listening as her name was read aloud, attached to words she still struggled to recognize as part of her life. The charges weren't dramatic, no sensational language. That made them worse. They were procedural, technical, built entirely on records, timestamps, and terms of service she had never read. The argument wasn't that she planned anything. It was that she enabled it, that she failed to act responsibly with access she controlled. Hannah wanted to interrupt, to explain again how harmless it had felt, how common it was, how she never imagined consequences like this. But the courtroom wasn't interested in imagination. It was interested in responsibility. Her lawyer spoke about intent, about context, about proportionality. The prosecution spoke about precedent, about accountability, about how systems fail when rules are treated casually. Both sides sounded calm, professional, detached. That detachment terrified her. As the process moved forward, Hannah learned how quickly life could shrink. Her schedule began revolving around meetings, paperwork, and restrictions she didn't fully understand until they were imposed. Travel became complicated. Work became awkward. School administrators started asking careful questions. People stopped looking at her the same way. Not with hostility, with caution. As if something about her had changed, even though she felt exactly the same inside. The waiting continued, but now it carried weight. Each delay meant more uncertainty. Each postponement felt like a door closing slowly instead of slamming shut. At night, Hannah lay awake thinking about how easily everything had unraveled. Not because of a bad decision, but because of a casual one. Something she hadn't even considered worth remembering. When the judge finally spoke about possible outcomes, the room seemed to tilt. Probation, fines, community service. And then, almost casually, the word custody. It wasn't emphasized, it wasn't dramatic, it was simply listed among possibilities like weather in a forecast. Hannah's mind latched onto it immediately. Custody meant bars, locks, losing control of time, losing privacy, losing the ability to leave a room when fear became too much. She tried to imagine herself in that world and failed. The image wouldn't form. It felt incompatible with who she was, with who she had always been. But compatibility didn't matter. Procedure did. The final weeks before sentencing were the worst, not because anything happened, but because nothing did. Life paused while the future waited to be decided. Hannah noticed how fragile her sense of self had become, how easily confidence dissolved into doubt. She replayed that night endlessly, searching for a version where she said no, where she ignored the message, where her phone battery died instead. None of those versions mattered anymore. When sentencing day arrived, Hannah didn't cry. She felt numb, as if her emotions had been drained by weeks of anticipation. The judge spoke carefully, acknowledging her lack of intent, her cooperation, her clean record. Then came the consequence, limited, measured, real. It wasn't the worst outcome possible, but it was still a sentence. As Hannah was led away to begin processing, the reality finally settled in. This wasn't a scare. This wasn't a lesson delivered and dismissed. This was punishment, not for who she was, but for what she allowed. The system had drawn its line, and she had crossed it without ever realizing there was one. The doors closed behind her with a sound she would never forget. And in that moment, Hannah understood something that no warning, no rule book, no terms of service had ever made clear. You don't have to commit a crime to lose your freedom. Sometimes all it takes is letting someone else borrow your trust. The first days inside didn't feel real to Hannah. They felt like a poorly constructed dream where everything was slightly off. The colors too dull, the air too heavy, the silence too intentional. Time stopped behaving the way it used to. Minutes dragged, hours stretched. Without a phone, without access to the outside world, the days lost their structure almost immediately. Morning, afternoon, night, they blurred into one continuous state of waiting. The intake process stripped her of individuality faster than she expected. Personal items were taken without ceremony. Clothing was exchanged for something generic, designed not to fit anyone in particular. Her name was replaced with a number that followed her, through paperwork and roll calls. No one was cruel, but no one was kind either. Efficiency ruled everything. Hannah realized that kindness wasn't part of the system. Neutrality was. Her cell was small, colder than she imagined, with sounds that never stopped. Doors opening and closing, distant voices, footsteps echoing down corridors at all hours. Even in silence, the building felt alive, watching. Sleeping was difficult. The bed was uncomfortable, the light never fully disappeared, and her mind refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same image, her phone screen lighting up, a simple request appearing, her finger tapping, confirm. The people around her were different from anyone she had known before. Some loud, some withdrawn, some moving with a confidence that came from familiarity with the place. Hannah felt out of place immediately. She didn't know how to sit, how to speak, when to stay quiet. Every interaction carried invisible rules she hadn't learned yet. She became hyper-aware of her movements, her tone, her expressions, and afraid that one wrong signal could make things worse. Fear didn't arrive as panic. It arrived as tension, constant, low level. A feeling that never left her chest. She learned quickly that attention could be dangerous, but invisibility wasn't protection either. Guards watched everything. Cameras caught what eyes missed. There was no private moment, no true isolation, no escape from being observed. Hannah had spent her life believing privacy was a default. Here it didn't exist. What hurt most wasn't the physical discomfort, it was the loss of identity. Outside, she was a student, an employee, a daughter, a friend. Inside, she was just someone who had crossed a line. intentionally or not, didn't matter. She listened to others talk about their cases, their mistakes, their regrets. Some were angry, some were numb, some joked about it as a defense. Hannah didn't feel like she, belonged to any category. She felt misplaced, as if she had wandered into a world built for consequences she never expected to face. Nights were the hardest. That was when memories crept in. The sound of her own room, the freedom to step outside, the simplicity of deciding what to eat, where to go, when to sleep. Things she had never valued before now felt impossibly distant. She wondered how many people outside still believed, like she once did, that staying out of trouble was enough, that doing nothing wrong guaranteed safety. Inside these walls, that belief felt naive. Hannah began to understand that punishment wasn't always about intent. It was about example, about reminding people that systems demand respect, even when the rules feel invisible. She had become part of that reminder, a quiet case, a technical violation, a lesson wrapped in procedure. The realization didn't bring comfort, it brought clarity. She wasn't here because she was bad, she was here because she was careless. And carelessness, she now understood, could cost just as much as cruelty. As days passed, Hannah stopped counting time the way she used to. She counted it in moments of silence, in meals, in head counts. The outside world faded, replaced by routines she never chose. And somewhere deep inside, a new fear began to form. Not of being inside, but of what this place might take from her before she ever left. Because surviving was one thing, but returning unchanged felt impossible. By the time Hannah stopped flinching at the sound of metal doors, something inside her had already shifted. It wasn't strength, and it wasn't acceptance. It was adaptation. The quiet, unsettling ability to function in a place she never imagined she would survive. The human mind, she learned, bends faster than pride ever admits. Her days settled into repetition. Wake up, stand for count, eat without tasting, wait, sit, listen, wait again. Every action followed an order, spoken or implied. Choice had been replaced by compliance, and the strangest part was how quickly that became normal. What once felt unbearable now felt routine, and that realization frightened her more than the bars ever did. She began to observe people differently, not as strangers but as mirrors. Everyone had a story that started small, a decision made quickly, a moment where someone thought, "It won't matter." Hannah noticed a pattern. Almost no one believed they belonged there. Each person had a version of themselves they still clung to, an identity that existed outside the walls. And yet all of them were here. One afternoon, during a brief period of supervised downtime, Hannah overheard a conversation that stayed with her. Two women were talking quietly about their cases, not with anger, but with exhaustion. One of them said something simple, almost careless. "I didn't do anything serious, I just didn't think it through." The other nodded without looking up. No judgment. No surprise. That sentence echoed in Hannah's head for hours. She replayed her own moment again. The ride request, the borrowed account, the convenience. There had been no alarm bells, no sense of danger. Just speed, ease, trust in technology. She realized then how much modern life had trained her to act without questioning. Apps promised safety. Systems promised protection. Responsibility felt outsourced, distributed, diluted. But inside this place, responsibility was painfully concentrated. Late at night, lying awake under artificial light, Hannah began to understand the deeper punishment. This wasn't just about time taken from her life. It was about perspective permanently altered. She would never again see a small favor as harmless. Never again assume distance equaled innocence. Never again believed that ignorance offered shelter. She thought about her parents, how they must be explaining her absence to relatives, co-workers, neighbors. About the looks, the pauses, the careful phrasing. She thought about future interviews, background checks, applications that would ask questions she couldn't avoid anymore. This place wasn't temporary, it followed you out. The weight of that knowledge pressed harder each day. One morning during a routine check, a guard looked at her file longer than usual, said nothing, moved on. But that silence carried meaning. Hannah realized she had become a record, a data point, a case number tied to an incident she couldn't undo. The world outside would see her not as the girl who made a mistake, but as the mistake itself. And yet something unexpected happened alongside that fear. She started to feel responsibility returning. Real responsibility, not the abstract kind she'd known before. Responsibility for attention, for questions asked too late, for assumptions she would never make again. It hurt, but it grounded her. Pain sharpened her awareness in a way comfort never had. Hannah wasn't learning how to survive prison. She was learning how fragile freedom actually was. And the most terrifying part wasn't how easily she had lost it. It was how easily she might have lost it again, if this hadn't happened. As days turned into weeks, one truth became unavoidable. This place was teaching her a lesson she would carry forever, not through violence, not through cruelty, but through exposure, to consequences stripped of drama, delivered through procedure, routine, and indifference. And deep down, Hannah knew something worse was coming. Not another sentence, not another charge, but the moment she would walk out and realize that the world no longer saw her the same way. Because freedom, once broken, never returns untouched. The day Hannah walked out did not feel like freedom. There was no dramatic release, no sense of victory, no breath of relief the way she had imagined during sleepless nights. The air outside felt thinner, almost unreal, as if the world had continued moving while she had been paused, and now she was stepping back into it out of sync. The gate closed behind her with a sound she would never forget. Not loud, not violent, just final. Her phone felt strange in her hand, heavier than it should have been. Notifications flooded the screen. Missed messages, expired passwords, automated reminders for a life that had kept going without her. It was overwhelming in a quiet way, like standing in the middle of a crowd where no one notices you exist. Her parents stood a few steps away. They smiled, but their faces carried exhaustion rather than relief. They hugged her carefully, as if she were fragile glass. Hannah realized then that even the people who loved her most didn't quite know who she was anymore. Neither did she. The ride home passed in silence. Familiar streets felt unfamiliar, like copies of places she once knew. Every shop window reflected a version of her she didn't recognize, someone older, quieter, sharper around the edges. She kept expecting something to feel normal again. It never did. At home, everything was exactly where it used to be. That somehow made it worse. Her room untouched, her clothes still hanging neatly, her life preserved like a museum exhibit. The contrast between this stillness and the rigid chaos she had just left behind made her chest tighten. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. Not because of noise, but because of space. Silence felt too open, too unguarded. She found herself counting hours without meaning to, waiting for instructions that never came. Freedom demanded decisions, and she had forgotten how to make them. Days passed, then weeks. Reality began to press in through small, cutting moments. Job applications that ended abruptly once background checks appeared. Conversations that shifted tone when someone learned where she had been. Invitations that stopped arriving without explanation. No one said anything directly, but distance grew. naturally, effortlessly. She learned how quickly a label could replace a person. The worst moments weren't confrontations, they were absences, friends who replied slower, employers who never replied at all, opportunities that quietly vanished. Hannah realized that punishment did not end with release. It simply changed shape. One afternoon, she finally opened the ride-sharing app again. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through old trips, frozen in time. That single ride still sat there, unremarkable, indistinguishable from dozens of others. No warning, no sign, just a digital record of the moment everything began to collapse. She closed the app and deleted it. For the first time since leaving prison, she cried, not out of fear but out of clarity. She finally understood that the mistake itself had been small, almost invisible. But the system didn't care about intention. It cared about connection, about proximity, about proof. And she had been connected. Slowly, painfully, Hannah began rebuilding. Not her old life. She understood that was gone. But something quieter, more deliberate. She chose her words carefully, her actions even more so. Trust was no longer automatic, neither was forgiveness. She began speaking less and listening more, watching how quickly people dismissed risks they didn't think applied to them. How often they said, "That could never happen to me." She never interrupted them, because she knew something they didn't. That prison doesn't always start with bad intentions. Sometimes it starts with convenience. And the real sentence doesn't end when the door opens. It begins when you realize the world remembers what you wish it would forget. Hannah walked forward anyway, changed, marked, and painfully aware. Because once you learn how easily freedom can disappear, you never live carelessly again. Hannah felt the weight of the world she had left behind pressing down harder with each passing day. Even outside the walls, the sense of confinement didn't disappear. Every glance, every decision, every digital footprint reminded her that a single mistake could follow her forever. She began noticing how people avoided eye contact, how employers hid doubts behind polite smiles, how friends she had considered loyal slowly distanced themselves, as if an invisible barrier had risen between them and her. This barrier wasn't physical, yet it felt sharper than any prison wall she had ever faced. Every day she woke up with an underlying anxiety, as if the world itself might judge her at any moment. She tried to act perfectly, reading every message carefully, thinking twice before responding, analyzing every movement. But the more she tried to be cautious, the more vulnerable she felt. That tiny error, ordering a ride for someone else, had snowballed into a shadow that would never leave her. Inside her grew a mixture of anger and shame. She understood she hadn't been a criminal in the traditional sense. Yet the world had marked her differently. Each phone call, each verification, each form she filled out reminded her how easily one can be swept into consequences not entirely their own. In moments alone, Hannah replayed that night endlessly. Why did she agree? Why did she trust? Why did a simple gesture become a link in a chain that unraveled her life? But the tension inside her wasn't only destructive, it was instructive. She began seeing life through the lens of responsibility, understanding the fine line between safe and dangerous, between innocence and inadvertent complicity. Everything seemed risky now, and she felt it acutely. Every choice, every habit was under scrutiny. Any negligence could be held against her, even years later. Slowly, she realized that true freedom wasn't a matter of physical space. It wasn't about leaving prison walls behind. Freedom was the ability to act with awareness, knowing that even the smallest gesture could have profound consequences. She had become a case study in caution, a constant reminder of how quickly a life could shift because of a simple decision. One evening, staring out the window at the city lights, she saw life continuing as if nothing had happened. People moved, cars passed, lights flickered on and off. The contrast between their normalcy and her reality pressed down on her chest. She felt the full weight of her mistake, not the fear of punishment, but the knowledge that her life had been irrevocably altered. A quiet understanding settled within her. There is no undoing the past, no simple fix. Every action from that night had consequences that would follow her forever. Hannah knew she would never look at freedom the same way again. She was marked by one small error, and that mark would stay with her, shaping every choice she made, every step she took. The first time Hannah stepped outside unaccompanied, it didn't feel like freedom. There was no celebration, no deep inhale of relief. The air itself felt different, thinner, almost unreal, as if the world had moved on while she had been frozen in time. Everything seemed familiar yet strangely alien. Streets she knew so well looked like a labyrinth of opportunity and risk, each corner carrying potential danger. The gate clicked shut behind her with a finality that she would never forget. Not loud, not violent, just definitive. Holding her phone again felt strange. Notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls, expired passwords, automated reminders for a life that had continued without her. The barrage was overwhelming, like standing in the middle of a crowd that didn't see her. Her parents waited silently, smiles forced, carrying exhaustion rather than relief. Even those who loved her most didn't fully recognize her anymore. The ride home was quiet. Streets and buildings felt both familiar and distant. Each reflection in the shop windows showed someone she barely recognized. Older, quieter, sharper around the edges. She expected to feel normal again. She never did. At home, everything was exactly as she remembered. The stillness of her room, the unchanged furniture, the untouched clothing. It was a museum exhibit of the life she had lost. That stillness hurt more than the confinement itself. Nights were the hardest. Silence stretched infinitely and sleep became impossible. Freedom demanded decisions, but she had forgotten how to make them naturally. Every choice now carried the weight of consequence. Weeks passed and reality pressed down in subtle but relentless ways. Jobs disappeared after background checks, friends hesitated, opportunities quietly vanished. Punishment didn't end with prison, it simply transformed. Hannah saw the ride-sharing app on her phone one evening and trembled. The single ride that had begun it all sat there, unchanged, ordinary, yet monumental. No warning, no marker, just a digital trace of the moment her life shifted forever. She deleted the app. Tears came finally, not from fear but from clarity. The mistake had been small, almost imperceptible, yet the system didn't care about intent. It only cared about actions, connections, and proof. Gradually, she began rebuilding. Not her old life, which was gone, but a quieter, more deliberate existence. She chose words carefully, acted with awareness, and trusted with caution. She learned the hard truth. Freedom, once threatened, never returns the same. Standing on a rooftop looking at the city, Hannah understood one final haunting truth. The consequences of a single mistake do not end at prison walls. They follow you, shadowing every step, shaping every choice, and perhaps the most terrifying realization of all. The world doesn't ask about intentions, it only judges actions. One small error can change everything. And Hannah had learned that lesson in full.